Pastor Sean and I were in Orlando this summer, and when we were in Orlando, we were at the Four Seas Conference, and when we got there, we flew in there, and we Ubered to the hotel, and then the hotel was connected to this really big mall. We literally just walked out of the hotel into the mall. And so for 4 days, we lived in this self-contained world. We didn't see the outside world. People were like, how was Florida? How was the weather? We had no idea. We were in the hotel. We went to meetings. We went to worship services. We walked into the mall to eat, and then we would walk back. And so it was this back and forth all week. And I was in the elevator a lot, right? Because I'd go to a conference, and I didn't want to carry my stuff or wear a name tag around the mall. So I would go back to my room, put it all there, and I would get in the elevator and go back downstairs to walk out to the mall to get something to eat, and then come back and go back to my room and get my stuff and go. It was just back and forth to the room, to the elevator, all the time. So, third day of the conference, it's Wednesday, and I'm in the elevator, and it was a particularly busy time. I think I just finished lunch, and it seemed like everybody was getting on the elevator to go somewhere. And so we're in this elevator, and people just keep coming on. And it feels like there's too many people. And have you ever been in the elevator and felt like that? Like, what is the weight limit? How much do we weigh? And so this family, this grandma, mom, and a little girl, they come on, and we just kind of all squeeze to make room for them. Doors barely shut. Elevator starts to go down. It's moving down. And then all of a sudden it stops. And then everything goes black. All the lights go out. Lights on the button are off. Grab the little emergency phone. It don't work. We're quiet for a second, because nobody had any idea what was going on, right? And then somebody says, guess we shouldn't have let those last people on the elevator. This is all going through our minds. Like, maybe we've made a mistake here. We've crammed too many people. And when she said that last little girl that came on started to freak out. And she just started to say, Mommy, over and over and over again. And when she did that, the anxiety started to build. I'm trying to stay calm, because I am for sure the biggest person in this elevator. And I don't want to move and tip the ship or whatever. I'm just going to stay still. But you can feel, have you ever been in that situation where you could just feel the anxiety in the room? It's palpable. There's nobody to call. There's no buttons to press. The doors won't open. There's nothing for us to do but just stand there. And then the lights just came on. The car kind of jumped, started to move, and let us off. And we all just walked out like nothing had happened. I never got in the elevator with that many people again that week. But as I went to the next meeting, they began to talk, and we found out while we were in the elevator, lightning hit the hotel and knocked the power out, which apparently is a very common thing in that part of Florida, which I had no idea about. But the thing is, I'd been in a hotel so long, I had no idea it was storming. I hadn't been outside. I didn't know if it was 95 and sunny. I had no idea what was going on. But the storm was there whether I knew it or not, right? And it affected my life whether I knew it or not. Our walks with Jesus work this way sometimes. We are on this journey with Him, and there are storms. There's this confusion amongst us sometimes that we think if we're following Jesus, as long as I'm with Jesus, everything will be okay. As long as I'm with Jesus, nothing bad will ever happen. And just read the Gospels. That is not true. There are storms. There are difficulties. There are hardships that happen with us as we journey with Jesus. And sometimes we don't see Him coming. Sometimes we don't know where they came from. We don't know what to do about them. We're just kind of left in the dark. and there's no answer, there's no solution, we don't even really know what the problem is. We just kind of feel the weight and the effects of it, right? Some of you here today, and you feel like you're stuck in that elevator. You've been left in the dark. And you don't know how to get out. You don't know how to fix it. You don't know how to overcome it. Life feels that way sometimes. We're just going about our routines. We're working. We're raising families. We're doing the things that we're supposed to do, that we expect to do, and suddenly something that we never saw coming sets in. A storm that we didn't expect overwhelms us. We don't understand it. We don't know about it. We don't know how to overcome it and recover from it. How do you respond to that? As we look in the Gospel of Mark today in chapters 4 and 5, what we're going to see is, I believe that here, that in the storms that set in, people respond in one of two ways. They respond with fear, or they respond with faith. And the question for you today is, on your journey with Jesus, in which way are you responding to the storms that have set in your life? Will you live in fear of the unknown? Fear of what you don't understand? Fear of where you don't see and know God in your life? Or will we live with faith in the one who is going through the storm with us? Let's look where the disciples land here. We're going to start in chapter 4. We're going to work our way through this passage. In verse 35 and 36, we're going to start there. And it says, as evening came, Jesus said to his disciples, let's cross to the other side of the lake. So they took Jesus in the boat and started out, leaving the crowds behind, although other boats followed. But soon a fierce storm came up. High waves were breaking into the boats, and it began to fill with water. And so we have here, simple start to this well-known story. Jesus and the disciples are on a boat. Now understand this. If we would have just read the whole Gospel of Mark to this point today, here's what we would have seen. Jesus, at this point in his ministry in Mark, has cast out demons. He has healed Peter's mother-in-law from presumably her deathbed. He has healed leprosy. He's made a lame man walk. He's changed the physical deformities of someone. And then it tells us that multiple times that crowds have gathered around him, and Jesus spent the day just healing all the different things that came to him. So the disciples have seen an abundant amount of power in Jesus so far, right? But what they see here is something beyond that. We'll see as Jesus shows power over the wind and the waves, as he shows power over nature. This is a miracle which for them is a step beyond that. Step beyond what they would expect from even what they have seen. But what we see right here in the beginning is the disciples, who we know from last week, the first four were fishermen, right? They've been on a boat on the Sea of Galilee hundreds, maybe thousands of times. This is not an uncommon journey. They go back and forth like this all of the time. The Sea of Galilee is surrounded by mountains. And so because of that, the weather there is very unpredictable. Storms can just set in. And here, that's what happens. Obviously, they get on a boat, and not just them, many people, right? Boats follow them. Many people get on the boats. Many people are trying to follow. None of them think this storm is coming. If they knew it was coming, they wouldn't have got on a boat. But as they're going out there, it tells us this storm sets in, and the word that's used here can be translated hurricane, cyclone, tempest. It's a big storm. Now notice this, it never says it rains. It's just wind. The wind comes in, and it's moving the waves. It's tossing them about. And then it says the boat begins to fill with water. Now let's just pause for a second and put yourself in the boat. Put yourself in the disciples' sandals for a second. What do you feel right now? You're afraid, aren't you? Let's just say off the top. If you don't feel afraid, there's something wrong with you. Right? That's a very normal human reaction. You're afraid. Why? Because you didn't see this coming. It's unknown. It's unexpected. Even these experienced fishermen who've been in this boat hundreds of thousands of times before, who've been in this situation before, even they were overwhelmed and afraid. So some of you think you're at a point in life where you're beyond encountering things that overwhelm you, and you're wrong. These storms set in, and you don't see them coming, you don't expect them. They're unknown, and we don't understand them. And when that happens, we become afraid. It happens to all of us. So what do we understand of who Jesus is in that situation? Because the message, listen, as we move forward, the message here is not, you should have more faith in that. Don't ever be afraid of anything that happens in life. No, that's unrealistic, right? But in that moment, when that fear sets in, how will we choose to allow Jesus to interact with our struggles, our problems, the things that we face? So what do the disciples do? They do what most of us would do. If you were stuck in this situation that you didn't know what to do, you couldn't overcome it, you had no answer for it, what do people, even people who don't believe in God, do? They call out to Jesus, right? So they turn to Jesus. Verse 38. Jesus was sleeping at the back of the boat with his head on a cushion. The disciples woke him up, shouting, "Teacher, don't you care that we're going to drown?" Now, Peter is who tells this to Mark. He could have just said Jesus was sleeping, right? But it's more than that. Like Jesus is unfazed by the storm, isn't he? He's still on a pillow. He's cushioned up. It's the disciples who are freaking out. And what's their prayer? What's their question to Jesus? First of all, we see from the word they use, they don't really understand who Jesus is yet. They're too early in that journey. Teacher, why don't you care that we're going to drown? Now, that tells us two things. Number one, the disciples had lost hope. This was a hopeless situation for them. They didn't think there was any way to overcome it or get past it. This is it. This is the end. We're all going to die. You probably have people in your life that react like that to every situation, right? Do you ever give up hope when those storms set in? Do you ever say, there's no answer, there's no end, there's no way this will ever be different? That's where the disciples were. Number two, they've determined that Jesus doesn't care. Why? Because he seemingly doesn't do anything, right? He doesn't respond. He doesn't say anything. He's just laying there. Now, it doesn't tell us exactly what they expect Jesus to do. Do they expect Jesus to be afraid? Do they expect Jesus to be acting differently? It doesn't tell us. Do they expect Jesus to do something? It doesn't say any of that. We don't know what they expect. We just know they expect something. And what they find is nothing. There are times in the midst of our storms where we come to feel this way about God. Where we have cried out and we believe that God is silent. And we ask him, why aren't you doing anything? Why don't you care? Why don't you say something? Why don't you do something? And we envision God just kicked back with his head on a pillow. Now, let me give you two answers as to why that happens. Why sometimes we get met with what we feel is silence. And that's a frightening position, right? when we feel like God has gone silent, it's terrifying. Number one, sometimes when we think God is silent, it's because we haven't heard him. It's not that he isn't speaking. It's that we haven't shut up long enough to hear him. Right? You scream and tear your whole life, you're not going to hear that gentle whisper that's speaking to you. So sometimes God is speaking. And we just haven't even really listened. He is moving. We haven't even really looked. We just know what we want him to change and what we want him to do and how we expect him to act. And he hasn't done that yet. So if he hasn't done that yet, then God hasn't done anything. And that's not true. But there's another bigger reason here. Why is Jesus sleeping on the boat? He's tired, yeah. Clearly he's tired. He's not afraid. He's not afraid of the storm. When Wesley was little, and I'd put him to bed, he would often tell me he was too scared to go to sleep. And I knew this was normally a ploy to not go to bed. Okay, that's typically what it was. Or the alternative is he wanted me to climb in bed with him. He's too scared, I'll lay next to you until you fall asleep. But I would ask him, Wesley, what are you afraid of? And he would say to me, I'm afraid of the dinosaurs. The dinosaurs are coming to get me. Do you know what I did then? Absolutely nothing. Do you know why? Because there weren't any dinosaurs. So sometimes the fears you think that overwhelm you, the things that you're afraid of, the things that you think are coming to get you and going to destroy your life, God's not afraid because they're not even real. They're not there. Sometimes they are real. And he just knows that they're not something to be afraid of. I knew that there were trains that were outside of our house that made the noises that Wesley thought were dinosaurs. I wasn't afraid of them. And so I had to ask him to go to sleep, to trust me that I was there to protect him, that if there were real danger, that I would take him somewhere safe. I wasn't silent in that moment because I didn't care. I was silent in that moment because there was nothing to be afraid of. And sometimes God isn't crying out when you are because he's not afraid of what you're afraid of. And his silence is not a lack of love. His silence is not ambivalence. His silence, it doesn't mean he doesn't care. His silence means he just doesn't feel the same way that you do about these problems. And praise God he doesn't. So we ask ourselves in the midst of the silence, why is God silent? Should I be afraid of it? Or should it give me confidence that my God is greater and bigger than the problems I face? But see, the disciples are afraid for a different reason. And Jesus points it out here in verse 39. When Jesus woke up, he rebuked the wind and said to the waves, "Silence, be still." Suddenly the wind stopped, and there was a great calm. Then he asked them, "Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith?" The disciples were absolutely terrified. "Who is this man?" they asked each other. "Even the wind and the waves obey him." Do you still have no faith? Why are you afraid? Do you have no faith? See, Jesus connects the two right there, doesn't he? Their fear is because they have yet to understand who is in the boat with them. Their fear is because they don't understand what the man in the boat with them is capable of. The fear is that they don't understand that the man in the boat with them is God. They should have in this moment. Because he stands up, and it says he rebukes the wind. That's the same exact word that Mark uses when Jesus casts out demons. And there's some suggestion there that there's something more spiritual about this storm than perhaps we can see. Regardless, it shows that Jesus has authority, right? He but speaks a word, and the wind and the waves listen. And the disciples say, "Who is this man?" But Job 26:12 says, "It is by God's power that the sea grows calm." Isaiah 51:9 and 10 tells the Israelites that God slayed the dragon of Egypt in the Nile River and showed his power through the parting of the seas and giving dry land. In Psalm 104:7, it reminds the Israelites that God brought forth the water that flooded the earth in judgment. And then it says this, that at the sound of the thunder of his voice, that water hurried away. Who is it that the Word of God tells us that at his word, the wind and the waves obey? It is God. And they should have seen and known in that moment when he spoke in that way, not who is this man, but they should have realized this man is God. And in him is contained the power of God. But they don't have enough faith to see that. Are you still afraid? Do you not have faith? What's their response to that question? Are you still afraid? Do you not have enough faith? The disciples were absolutely terrified. Their fear grows. Jesus calms the wind and waves. He ends the storm, and they're more afraid. Because they don't understand. Because they still don't know what happened. Because they don't have enough faith to see beyond their fear. It's in those moments where we've journeyed with God and we ask ourselves, do we really understand who he is? Do you really understand what he's doing on this journey with you and what he's capable of doing in your lives? Have you embraced that truth that he is God and that your fear sometimes blinds you? That him being God means that he is greater than any storm, than any problem, than any sickness, than any struggle that you face. There's nothing that you can face in life that you should be afraid of if Jesus is in the boat with you. Because whatever it is, he's greater. So the next passage, they get to the other side. We're not going to, this is 20 verses long, so we're not going to read this whole passage here. But I believe these passages are connected. And I believe that this next passage shows us what faith looks like instead of fear. So follow me. They get to the other side, and where they get to is a place that we call the Decapolis, which is 10 cities. That's what that means. And these 10 cities were not Jewish. They were Gentile. And these 10 cities were kind of like NATO. They had joined together as like a defense league. They were different than everybody around them, so they supported each other. And so Jesus lands in this Gentile region. Even if we didn't know that about them, we know it was Gentile because there's herds of pigs there. They're not herds of pigs in Israel, okay? There's herds of pigs in Gentile lands. So they land, and Jesus, it tells us, is greeted by a demon-possessed man. And this demon-possessed man isn't just a normal demon-possessed man from what it tells us here. What it tells us is this, that he roams around naked, that he lives and sleeps in catacombs in the graveyards, that he howls at the moon at night and acts like a wild animal, that they've tried to chain him, but he's broken the chains. When they shackle him, he snaps the shackles. He cuts himself with stones at night, which we believe is a reference to some rituals of other religions. If that guy lives in your town, There's two things that are true. Number one, everybody knows about him, right? You've all heard stories about the crazy guy who lives in the graveyard, right? We all know that. Number two, everybody's afraid of him. Nobody's going to visit grandma in that graveyard, right? That's the guy that meets Jesus. And there's an exchange that happens here. And in our translation, it makes it look like he's like worshiping Jesus. But here's what's interesting. If we read Jesus' interactions with these evil spirits throughout the Gospel of Mark, they are always trying to gain authority over Jesus. In fact, the demon here says, "In the name of God, I command you not to torture me." He doesn't really know who Jesus is either. And Jesus speaks, and that demon obeys. He asks the demon what his name is, and we know this passage well. People use this word a lot, and it's in horror films and all those kind of things, where he says, in our translation, "My name is Legion." But what he's really saying is, there's so many of me, there's not just one name. A legion was 6,000 Roman soldiers. There's 2,000 pigs that this demon gets cast into. There's thousands of demons in this man. It's not one. There's a whole bunch of them. And the demons ask permission of Jesus to go into the pigs. They ask permission because he's the one with authority and power here, right? He says, "Have at it." They jump into the pigs. Pigs run away, jump over a cliff, drown in the water. The guys who own the pigs are freaked out. And they run into town and they say, "Hey, you know the crazy guy who lives in the graveyard who walks around naked howling at the moon? Some guy. Just talk to him, and then all of our pigs jumped in the water." And so everybody in town says, "We got to go check out this guy." And they all go down to the graveyard, and then it says this: when they go there, they find the man clothed insane sitting there. He's been completely changed. And they're terrified. Because if the guy you're all afraid of is overcome by but a word from the other guy, how much bigger and stronger is that guy? And so they ask Jesus to leave. Leave. Go away. They're too afraid to even come to ask the question, who is this man? They're too afraid to even wrestle with that. But there's one person who gets it. There's one person who at the end of this journey, through the wind and the waves and the pigs and the demons and all of it, gets it. Look in verse 18. As Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with him. But Jesus said, "No, go home to your family and tell them everything that God has done for you and how merciful he has been." So the man started off to visit the 10 towns of the region and began to proclaim the great things that Jesus had done for him, and everyone was amazed at what he told them. It would be a natural reaction for that guy who has been overcome and overwhelmed by these forces for so long, things that he could not control, to be afraid of the one who was stronger than them. He was not afraid. He recognized that this was the one person who held power enough to change his life. And he said, if that's you, I want in the boat. Here's the thing. In the Gospel of Mark, Jesus called people to follow him. He asked them to follow him. And this means asking to follow him. It's the opposite, right? And Jesus tells them no. Why? Is Jesus saying somebody like you can't follow me? Is Jesus saying somebody with your past can't get in the boat with me? Is Jesus saying because of what's happening and what you've been through, you're not good enough? That's not what he's saying. Jesus says that's not the journey I've called you to go on. I want you to go. The first missionary to the Gentiles in the Bible is a demon-possessed man healed by Jesus. So Jesus just says, go and tell them. Listen, he doesn't say, go and tell them what I did for you. He says, go and tell them what God has done for you. And he does. And people are amazed. Not afraid, not terrified, amazed at who Jesus is and what he can do. Fear is a natural reaction. We're all going to be afraid in life. There are things that happen that will make us afraid. There are overwhelming situations for which you cannot help but be afraid. But fear, we feel like it protects us, but it doesn't. And it doesn't answer our questions, and it doesn't lead us to a safe place. Faith is what overcomes fear. The question is, who's your faith in? Because if my faith is in me and faith is what I can do, that's why I'm so afraid, because I can't do very much. And I can't overcome the things I face. But faith in Jesus overcomes whatever fears we face. So today we have to answer that question. Will we choose fear or will we choose faith in life? You cannot have both on your journey with Jesus. Because with fear, you'll never really see who he is and what he wants to do. It's only when you have faith enough to trust him. Let me tell you a story that shows what that looks like. I've never been to the Rocky Mountains. I'm sure a lot of you have. I hear they're one of the most beautiful places in the world. But people get lost there all the time. Because one mountain looks like the other, and one valley looks like the other. And if you don't know where you're going or you wander off from a group, you don't know how to get back to where you were. And so there's always search parties and all those things that happen in the Rocky Mountains. There was this lady who wrote this story about she was camping there with her family, and they looked up and their daughter was gone. And she freaked out. She's afraid. Natural reaction, right? All should be afraid there. She's afraid, and she does what I think we all would do, and she starts shouting for her daughter. She starts screaming, running around frantically all through the woods, shouting her name, doesn't find her. So she gets back to the campsite, and she calls emergency services. Within 10 minutes, they have search parties there looking for the little girl. For hours, they comb the woods and the trails, shouting this girl's name. The whole place is covered with people shouting the girl's name. And the mom, after hours and hours, the whole day of this, she is just exhausted. And so comes this moment where she sits down on a rock. She's just physically and emotionally spent. And as she sat there, she had this realization. This is the first time I've been quiet all day. All I've been doing is shouting through these woods, and I have yet to listen for my daughter's voice. So she found everybody, and she said, stop calling her name and start listening for her voice. And so they all just stood still, listening. She said, I listened in the silence for a while, and I began to listen with every muscle in my body. And faintly, I could hear my daughter's voice calling my name. And that voice led her to find her daughter that day. Because she stopped being afraid and she started listening. Like that mother, in fear, we thrash through life's storms calling out to God. But we never stop to hear him call back. We're so often like the disciples on that boat. We're ready to accuse God of not caring. Because we haven't heard what we wanted to hear. Because we haven't seen what we wanted to see. Because he hasn't done what we wanted him to do. But have you considered that you've never really listened and never really looked? because you filled your life with so much noise that you can't hear Him. That fear is too loud to ever hear God's voice in faith. We fill our lives with this noise, don't we? Whether it's the radio or the television, the endless scrolling, the constant busyness. It's all noise that just adds to it. And we're just thrashing through the woods in life with no direction and no purpose, moving from one thing to the next without a second. Thinking about the impact that that's having on us, on our relationships, on our marriage, on our kids, on our lives. We're thrashing around in these woods of life, making so much noise that we cannot hear the one voice that's calling out to us through it. Our lives are so noisy that when the storms come, we expect to hear God's voice, and the truth is, we don't even know what it sounds like because we've never stopped to listen. God's silence is never because He's absent. It's because we haven't stopped long enough to listen. Storms will come, rain will fall. Life will be difficult, even if you follow Jesus closely every day. But if you'll quiet your heart beyond the storm, during the storm, after the storm, you will find that He's always been there. You will find that He's always been working. Maybe you'll find that the storm wasn't as bad as you thought it was when you were in it. Maybe you just allowed fear and anxiety to drown out the faith. If you listen, He'll show you where to go. And if He shows you where to go, friends, that is the right place to be. No matter what the storm looks like as you go there. If you're going to follow Jesus, you have to hear His voice. You might wonder, but I don't know. How do I know that it's God's voice? Jesus told us, my sheep know my voice. You'll know the shepherd when He calls. But you can't hear Him if you don't listen. And so I want to do that today. Just for a moment. Before we go and the worship team can come up as we do this. I just want us to quiet our hearts. To listen for that still soft voice. To push out the noise, to push out the busyness, to push out the fear, to cast all that aside and just quiet your hearts for a moment. And let God speak to your heart. And whatever He says to you, have faith and trust. It's exactly what you need to hear for whatever you're going through. Let's be quiet for just a moment and listen. Father God, we come to You today and we confess that we have allowed fear and noise and distractions to fill our lives. We've been shouting through the storm instead of listening for Your voice. But today, we choose faith over fear. We choose to trust the one who calms the wind and the waves, the one who speaks peace into our chaos. So, Lord, remind us today that we are not slaves to fear. Remind us that in Your strength, there are no chains that this world can put on us that You can't break. Because we belong to You. We've been called. You've called us by name. You've redeemed us. You've been with us in every storm. So, Father, as we sing the words to this song, let us proclaim that truth with confidence, that we are no longer slaves to fear because we are children of God. May we hear your voice in those words today. We pray all these things in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen and amen. Would you stand with us and sing?